Okay. Boker Tov, everyone. We're very excited to have the opportunity to learn from Rabbi Sarah Berman this morning. Rabbi Berman is the director of adult education at Central Synagogue and in New York City and works closely with Hilly. So I'm very delighted. Hilly says hi, by the way. She's downstairs. She might pop in to say hi. Um, but wanted to share just a little bit about Rabbi Berman, that her teaching at Central Synagogue is really far ranging. She focuses on Jewish art, history, material culture, text, and prayer. And actually, before she was director of adult education, she interned at Central Synagogue as a rabbinic intern. And also before rabbinical school, worked for over a decade at the Seattle Art Museum, so has a very strong background in art and art history, and really draws on that in her teaching. So we're delighted to have what we're calling a Haggadah talk with you, Rabbi Berman, and learn more about this 14th century Spanish Haggadah as we prepare for Passover. I'll turn it over to you.
Rabbi Martyr, thank you so much for having me. Good morning, everybody. Boker Tov. I am thrilled to be here with you today. Excuse me. As Rabbi Martyr said, I have a background in art and objects. And so anytime I get to bring this past self and present self into the same space is really exciting. We are going to be telling an object story. All of the objects in our Jewish lives tell us stories about the times and places that they were made, the people who made them, the people who used these objects, cared for them and preserved them over time, and passed them down to us. Objects, like our text, also do not stay static. They change physically and they change, excuse me, more spiritually. They change in terms of their meaning to us at any given moment in time based on what we are experiencing in the world. Excuse me, a little bit of a spring congestion here. My apologies. So this object story is a way for us to trace the experience of our ancient ancestors, our less ancient ancestors, and come into our own time and our own experiences. So that is why I call this an object story. The object that we are going to be focusing around, I think this is the closest I'm going to get to the full screen, so we'll do it. Excuse me. We're taking some of our more traditional text study techniques, like a Pardes style text study, looking at the different levels of meaning of an object for our study of this golden Haggadah, this 14th century Haggadah from Spain. So this object is going to tell us multiple stories on multiple levels. First, we're going to interrogate the Pshat level. What is this? And the Remez. When and how was it made? And who made it? And who used it? Our Drash level. How has this object changed over time? And our Sod. What are the stories it can tell about us today? Each of these levels of this not text, this object study, is going to be able to, or it's going to help us look from every angle at this constellation of meanings. This wheel, for me, is a great image to help think about an object that's at the center and these levels of meaning radiating outward. And these are meanings that, in some ways I'm going to share with you, and in lots of ways you are going to share with each other. So let's look at our object. This is a page from the Golden Haggadah, so named because there's so much gilding, so much gold leaf used in the book itself. Excuse me. This is just one page from a multi-page document, a multi-page manuscript made in Barcelona in northern Spain in probably the first quarter of the 14th century. What do you see on this page? Let's identify the scenes. And I'm hoping that you will just unmute yourselves and share what you see in this page. Is there a color or a type of figure that stands out to you. We can put names and titles to these scenes in a moment, but first, what are the colors that you see?
Blue.
Claire, I think I heard red.
Oh, Arnie said orange, and I noticed a lot of blue.
Orange and blue, absolutely.
Like a
In
mustard
addition
gold
to
color, because you said gold, so.
Lots of gold.
gold.
The
Gold
black
under-
stands out. I just see one, object in black.
Yeah. So the colors are really important because with all of the red and all of the blue and all of the gold, our eye is drawn to the page, but that one corner of black, those two figures wearing black, because black is used so sparingly in the rest of these illustrations, it really stands out. It draws the eye to that image. Each of these images is like a comic book. It is telling a piece of our Passover story. Can you identify which pieces of the Passover story are being told here? Which moments from the Exodus are being illustrated? So Rabbi Martyr, you saw the people in black.
Yes, I think that's the 10th and final plague. Looks like they're carrying a dead body away. So that was my assumption. And then I think I see the crossing of the sea. Those look like some sea creatures.
Yeah. Well, the crossing of the sea and the death of the firstborn, we see both of those. Next to the birth of the firstborn, the death of the firstborn has actually three images within it. In the top right, a child in a bed with an angel of death floating over and a parent already next to that child. In the top left, we see a mother cradling a baby. And in the bottom, we see these two figures in black leading a procession in which a covered body is being carried. Next to that, in the top left, we see a wall, a city wall, and people streaming forth, the going forth from the city. The bottom right, what do you see? What do you see, and how would you identify those figures?
Well, the army.
The soldiers.
See soldiers. Lorraine, I think that you were also starting
Yeah,
to
the
speak.
Egyptians had turned into medieval knights of
Egyptians
right.
turned into medieval knights. Exactly. Horses and standards and spears and shields, armor. And then in the bottom left, as Rabbi Martyr suggested, the Israelites crossing the sea, but behind them, underneath the sea, we could read that as sea creatures, but what else could we read that as?
the vanquished.
There are soldiers under the water.
I was going to say that.
Exactly. Those Egyptian soldiers, those medieval knights, consumed by the sea, which parts only for the Israelites, for the Hebrews to pass through.
It's great. You can see a little tip of the parted sea at Moses's cloak.
Yes, just the edge
Right.
of that of the parting, the parting that is ending. And it's those details that make this Haggadah so special and that make so many Haggadot so special. I mean, what makes a Haggadah? This is not a rhetorical question. This is an actual question with many answers. What makes a Haggadah different from, say, a Siddur or a Chumash or a Talmud, a printed Talmud or legal volumes? What is it that makes a Haggadah different? There's no one right answer, but I am looking for answers.
Well, one answer might be the clue we get when we say all the different parts of the Haggadah, which is it's almost like a mosaic of sorts, right? You have these different parts and they're not necessarily logically connected, or there is no internal logic necessarily there in it. And it's almost, the funny thing about it, it's almost random and disordered.
Yes.
It could be seen that way. And that's
I
quite
love that.
different from, let's say, a regular machzor or siddur.
Exactly.
The orchestration is very different.
Yeah, so the order or the internal logic is very different in a Haggadah. Robert, thank you so much. What else makes a Haggadah different?
May I say it's like a very visual experience, and we're supposed to reenact it so we can see it, and then it helps us feel it and sort of live it again.
Tell it.
Exactly right. So Laura, you've shared two very important elements here. One, that it is visual. It's a visual experience. It's not just words that take us through the story. It's also image that pulls us through this story. And that it's a reenactment, that we are meant to see ourselves in this story. We're meant to understand ourselves as being a part of this, and conversely, of this story being a part of us and living today. Our experiencing the moment then, and that story existing with us today.
I think that also, I'm not sure,
Really complex ideas, so thank you.
not sure that I'm
Yes.
answering the right, can you hear me?
Yes, Cheryl, thank you.
I also think that what's unique about the Hadassah is that, the Hadassah, oh my God. I work for Hadassah.
That was Lamb holiday.
No, I work for Hadassah, so it just comes out as soon as I say HA.
Oh, amazing.
Anyway, for the Haggadah is that there's a part for everybody. There's a part for the kids and there's a part for the adults. So I think that's really unique in that, you know, the Siddur doesn't have that. There's not a unique place for the kids.
And that's absolutely right. And Cheryl, even going beyond, there's a part for every adult and every child. There's also a part for Jewish participants and parts for the non-Jewish participants, for those who have never heard the story told in this way before. It's extraordinary in the inclusivity of this book. Any other thoughts on what makes the Haggadah unique? Chuck, were you going to speak?
Yeah, the haggadot are rewritten in every generation. So it's rewritten as a reflection of the times.
But there's
Yes.
add-ons that you can always get, right?
Yeah. Every Haggadah is created in our own image, if I may use that phrase. It reflects the people and the time, whereas sometimes the words will not, well, often the words will not change at all. The Haggadah itself will change to
That's
reflect
brilliant.
who we are as we carry this story with us.
It's a visual interpretation. I mean, it's a perfect historical record, the visuals, because it's great. You know, the fact that I don't think, Chuck, it's true that in contemporary times, we've created lots of different haggadot and inserted things, but I think it was pretty stable text for a very long time, and pictures.
Especially if you use the Maxwell House all those years.
Yeah, the blue cover.
And also I was just thinking that they asked a question like, what does the simple son say? And then there's an answer that you can read. So that was kind of different than the Torah doesn't ask it and then you tell the answer.
So it's very participatory.
Yes.
It's not just visual, it's multisensory. I mean,
Yeah.
it engages you on sort of all the levels of your senses,
Especially taste.
perceptually, yes.
But the basic text of the Haggadah is the same, but so much of the Seder has to do with using the text as a jumping off point for
Right.
discussion. And the discussion are generally reflective of the times.
Right.
And a lot of the updating of the Haggadot also uses art that's reflective of the times.
Right. And so, Chuck, you're reflecting what so many of your fellow congregants are noticing and have also mentioned. So this book, the Haggadah, unlike all of our other books, is thought to exist for the express purpose of teaching children. The text of a Seder, the text of Haggadah, that's for everybody. But the Haggadah as a book, as an illustrated volume, one that a family can pass around and a family can pass down through the generations, is thought to exist for the express purpose of teaching children the Jewish story, of bringing children into the experience of being part of the children of Israel. That is unique, and that is expressive of a value that we have shared for thousands of years. This Haggadah was made for a family in Barcelona in, as I said, the first quarter of the 14th century. So probably around 1320, give or take some years. It was a text that included, like all Haggadot, scenes from the Passover story, scenes from the Exodus, illustrations of other elements of the Seder. This Haggadah, we think of the Haggadah as having a set text that we use generation to generation, but different times and places have incorporated differences in the text. In the 14th century in Spain, liturgical poems, piyutim, that were from northern Spain of about the 200 years preceding this date. Piyutim were also included in the Haggadah, in many of the haggadot of this time and place. So the text and not just the images reflect who we are, where we are, and when we are. The golden backgrounds are what give this book its name, the golden backgrounds to most of the illustrations throughout the Haggadah. It reflects a family, a commission of high quality, of expense, of great expense. The paintings themselves reflect the high quality of a painter who was trained abroad. The materials, the appearance, and then the fine calligraphy, the fine safrut throughout this Haggadah, all reflect an elevated level of wealth, an elevated level of resource, and a refined sense of visuality. This Haggadah was probably, in fact, made by 3 artists collaboratively, 2 working with the illustrations and 1 with the text. Whoever made it, whoever owned it, a Haggadah exists for a specific purpose.
Rabbi Berman, I have a quick question.
Sure.
If I'm looking at the top with the inch markings here, this is tiny, right? I mean, each tiny box is maybe an inch or inch and a half. Is that correct, or is that just a distortion?
So I didn't hear the middle part of your question. Would you say it one more time?
Yeah, if you look at the markings up at the top, the inch markings, like the scale, says, it seems like it's a very small book, right? It's about 4 inches wide. And then if you look at each of the little, one of the 4 blocks, it's maybe an inch and a half wide. Is that correct? Or is this just,
so the inches are my screen and not the book.
Okay.
So we had some technical difficulties, and so I'm not able to do a full screen share.
Yeah.
The inch markings are, if I were to print this as on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, the illustration of the Haggadah would only take up 4 inches of it.
Okay.
It is not a, and that's the drawback of not being able to share this full screen.
Right.
It suggests that this book is smaller than it is.
Okay.
I am on an 11-inch Mac laptop. And I would say that this book is about the size of my laptop.
Okay.
If I could, I have it says here in the book I have on Passover art that this from the Golden Haggadah, it's 9 3/4 by 7 3/4. So it is pretty small.
Yeah, small. Thank
9
you.
3/4 altogether. So that is sort of like a smaller tablet or smallish
9
laptop.
3/4 height for a Haggadah is not so tiny. So, that's not bad.
Exactly. It's like I said, it's close to the size of a sheet of paper. It's close to the size of.
I thought this was like palm size, but it's not. So you
No,
clarified it. Thank you.
Yeah. It is meant to, and the size matters. I'm glad you brought this up. The size matters because how is a Haggadah like this used? Unlike a Maxwell House Haggadah, where every participant in the Seder has their own copy, this would be a shared copy among a family, a single copy that would be passed around, or as it aged through time, people might move in their seats to be closer to the Haggadah. It's large enough that multiple people can see the text and the image at a single moment, but not so large that it is, if you think of the huge pulpit Bibles of the 14th century church, or even the large pulpit Qurans of that same period in Iran. This is a small volume meant to be handheld, not pocket-sized, but meant to be handheld.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Let me go to the next slide. Oh, here's the problem with the screen. Let me try my screen share one more. Share the slideshow one more time. Let me just see if it will work. Give me one moment. Does it show?
No.
It's not. It's very
It's a
strange.
blank
Loading
page, yeah.
still, doesn't it? Yeah.
Okay.
All right, it says loading still. All right. Well,
Oh,
then
something happened.
I
There we go.
apologize
I mean,
for the
oh, that's a mess.
text that was meant to be,
Oh, now it's fine.
because I deleted some text.
Oh, okay.
You'll just have to bear with me as I do this on some of the slides that involve text. My apologies. Thank you for bearing with me.
No
Before we
problem,
go
and
on, may I just say looking at the previous Haggadah, that it's sort of bittersweet because it was evidently done less than 100 years before the Inquisition. And it's amazing it survived.
What, did it?
And that is, and you know what, I appreciate the comment, and I'm going to just say you are getting ahead of us. We will get to that piece of the story. This is, again, it's a 360-degree view of this Haggadah and what it teaches us. And how can we not look at a Spanish Haggadah from before the Inquisition and not talk about the Inquisition? So we will get, it's my least favorite answer in any talk. We will get there. We're just not there yet.
Okay.
So this page from the Golden Haggadah is the Seder of the Seder. It is our order of service. And it is familiar to us who read or perhaps sing this moment at the beginning of our Seder. We can see in larger letters, Kadesh, Urchatz, Karpas, Yachatz, Magid, Rachza, Motzi Matzah. And in the left column, Maror, Korech, Safun, Barech, Hallel, and Nirtzah. This is the Seder as we know it. This book from 700 years ago, almost exactly 700 years ago, is familiar to us. We could follow along in it today. That is extraordinary, that there is a consistency to our tradition, that we could time travel 700 years ago and have a Seder that is almost identical to what we experience today. But this order emerged over time. It took hundreds of years for this to be canonized, for this to be set. What did the first Seders look like? Well, if we skip the quick departure of our Israelite ancestors from Egypt and go to the observance of Pesach in or out of Egypt and beyond the wanderings. Here from the book of Joshua, the first post-Torah book, we have a description of Pesach for our ancient ancestors who are just entering the promised land. Would somebody be willing to read this text out loud? I know we can all see it, but for some of us, it's easier to hear the text than to read the text. Robert, I see that you are unmuted.
Okay.
Would you be willing to read the text?
Sure. Encamped at Gilgal in the steppes of Jericho, the Israelites offered the Passover sacrifice on the 14th day of the month toward evening. On the day after the Passover offering, on that very day, they ate of the produce of the country, unleavened bread and parched grain.
So here we have ancestors, somewhere around 1100, 1200 BCE, who are marking Passover with a sacrifice, which we of course no longer do, but they mark this day on the same day that we begin our Passover, that we have a Seder, and they mark it with the produce of the country, with unleavened bread and parched grain. This already is a Passover observance that has elements that are familiar to us. I mean, really, even if we don't understand Tanakh as historical, if we accept a historian or an archaeologist's suggestion that Joshua didn't actually live, there was no Joshua. Joshua was a made-up character later. He was made up by the 7th or 8th century BCE. So even if he didn't exist in 1200 BCE, his story existed by 2,700 years ago. This is the strength of our tradition, that we find ways to take an observance and continue it through the ages, from generation to generation, even as our places and circumstances and manner of worship change. So Seder, which means order, here is our order right here. Why would you believe, and again, not a rhetorical question, actual question that I want many answers to, why would this be the order of our service, where we begin with a blessing and move to a cleansing, where we eat of spring vegetables, where we clean again, where we tell a story, where we tell the story, where we eat of these foods that we know of from Joshua, where we eat bitter herbs, and a meal where we bless and conclude our story together. Why would this be the order of our Seder, the order of the order? It's not an easy question, but there's also not one right answer.
I guess it must, I'm wondering if it follows some of the psukim in the Torah, right, that speak to Passover, that maybe, I don't know, Kadesh is first, and although they're not all Torah, creations, but maybe there's some historiography in the Torah. I don't know, just guessing.
For it, historiographic, and I think maybe it was Cheryl who said it before, so that we feel ourselves in the story. We bring the story into our lives in its order, and we continue to perform it or tell it in its order. Josh, thank you. I love that. Why else might this be the order of our order?
I think you start with holiness, with blessing, you end with it as well. And in between the two poles, you go from praise to telling the story, of putting ourselves into the story, to more praise. And then we end covenantally as holy with God as well, through the experience of Yetziat Mitzrayim.
Absolutely. We begin and end with praise, and in between, we're moving back and forth between God and God's role in this story and the human experience, the lived experience of this, of the Exodus. I love that going back and forth, the never letting God be too far from thinking of this as a human experience. God is always present.
It also occurs to me that if this is to teach the children, that the order is interspersed with eating and different modalities of learning.
That's great.
I love that. That's exactly. Claire, are you a teacher?
I was.
But that's exactly it. The modalities of learning, we all learn differently. And in particular, children, as we know from the 4 children that we talk about explicitly in this ritual. We learn differently, and we learn the story in different ways. And it is multi-sensory as an experience. I can't remember who used the word before, but that's exactly what this is. And there's delayed gratification when it comes to the food. You don't begin with food, you have to wait for the food. So that's another important lesson. Sorry, I interrupted.
It strikes me like a movie remake. The story, the order is the same, but it's always different. You always add a little, you subtract a little. And that's what this is doing. It's allowing you to do that.
Yep, absolutely.
Bill, we can't see your face, just the top of your head.
But we could
That's a
see your
good
hand
thing.
gesturing, and it was gesturing very fluently.
Well, because I'm in a hotel in Nebraska, so
Chooses the core.
Oh my.
Amazing.
Are you seeing the crayons?
we did.
Okay.
I just
Rabbi
wanted to say,
Martyr.
oh, thank you. I just wanted to say that I love that you put the Joshua text next to the order of the Haggadah, because I think what we're seeing, for what I'm seeing in really sort of in a stark way, is the rabbinicalization of the Passover ritual. So what is the ritual here in Joshua? There's a sacrifice and there's eating. And so here we are doing ritualized eating in a rabbinic way. Of course, we bless before we eat. We bless before we wash our hands, that's part of it. We end with thanking God for the food we just ate. So it's a rabbinically structured meal now, as opposed to they ate the produce of the country, unleavened bread and parched grain, kind of simple. Now it's this sort of complex rabbinical way of eating a meal that includes Torah study now. That's what Magid is, essentially. And throughout, it's Midrash. The whole experience is eating and Torah study. Like, what could be better than that? But also done in a rabbinical way.
And the eating and the Torah study done at night are things that need light in order to happen, right? We need to be able to see our food. We need to be able to see our text. And so the fact that this happens not on the first day of a month, like a Rosh Hashanah, this is a holiday that begins at evening at the end of the 14th day of the month, because Hebrew months begin with the new moon, which puts the full moon at mid-month. This is an evening ritual that happens if you don't even have enough money, if you don't even have enough funds in order to light your home, you can still participate in a Passover ritual, a Seder, with the light of the full moon. This is a great leveling. It is a way of allowing every member of the community to take part. Let all who are hungry come and eat. We all participate in this, whatever our resources. And we see that right here in the Joshua text, that from the very beginning, this is something that has happened the end of the 14th day of the month as the 15th day begins. So let's see if I can go to the next slide. Here we go. Home observance of Passover, of some kind of ritual around Passover, was already in place by the time the temple was destroyed. So even while sacrifice was still our primary method of worship, study had already spread to local communities in the form of synagogues and into homes, private homes, in the Passover ritual. The piece that came into homes first was the Magid, the telling of the story. So the Mishnah from around the year 200, simplifying 200 to 220 of the Common Era, already tells us that established are the arrangement of table and the singing of Hallel, the use of psalms, other liturgy in a home-based Passover ritual. We know that from the Mishnah. But the Haggadah, as we know it, is recognizable. We could pick up a Haggadah from around the year 500 or 600 CE, or we could, in fact, pick up a Siddur from around the year 500 or 600 CE. And in it would be included a Seder, and we would recognize Haggadah, our Haggadah text, in those documents. So home-based practice is in place 2,000 years ago. We know that many of the building blocks of our home-based ritual are in place by 1,800 years ago. And by 1,500 years ago, we have a recognizable Seder. We have a recognizable Haggadah text. As a separate book, the Haggadah, it leaps out of the Siddur Around the 8th century and following that, in different times and places, it stays as part of a Siddur for longer, but then is its own independent document by the late Middle Ages in just about every Jewish community. This book, once it emerges on its own as a book and not just engaged in a larger Siddur, it becomes a place that is prime for artistry, not just words surrounded by illustration or words surrounded by pattern, but full on illustration. This is still our Golden Haggadah, the title page, which shows an architectural element with what are known as caryatids, these architectural columns, engaged columns in the forms of people as if they are holding up a building above them. This archway or doorway is like an invitation to enter a home, enter a story. But this is some of the artistic creativity that is not, it's not clearly defined in the Haggadah. The Haggadah doesn't have instructions for how it should be illustrated. This is showing artistic license and creativity in and around the Jewish community in Barcelona in the 14th century. This is a book that isn't just illustration, though, as we well know, but it bears saying out loud. The Haggadah is a combination of words and images. Literacy in the Jewish community was higher than it was in the Catholic community. Looking at numbers based on studies done of church records largely, but also of some synagogue records, comparing the 14th century and the 16th century, literacy in the Jewish community was higher, significantly higher than the Catholic community. It was mostly men who were literate, mostly men who were able to engage in study. So largely not people who were laborers, but those who worked in trades and could leave their trade on the Sabbath and sit with other men in study. But some women were also literate in this time period, increasingly so. So the number of women who were literate and seemed to be literate in the Jewish community in the 14th century grows then by the 16th century. Women are reading in order to read Psalms, in order to read prayers, in order to read the Haggadah, and that's Hebrew literacy. Women in the Jewish community also have literacy in the local language, as do men, in order to conduct business with their neighbors, in order to fill out receipts when selling a product, or receive a receipt when purchasing a product. The exception to this rule within the Catholic community are convents. Nuns are highly literate, but that is the only class of women outside the Jewish community who are more literate than Jewish women in Europe at this time. I think that's fascinating. We are a people of the book, and instruction about who we are and what our practices are, instruction in halakha, not, don't think of it as legal prescriptions and proscriptions. Think of halakha as the instructions for living a Jewish life. That's something that everybody needs to have access to, and literacy is the way in. So with the Haggadah, specifically this kind of book and this specific book we're looking at, the intention of the Haggadah is to teach. It is to teach younger generations what the story of our people is, the foundational story of our people. And so whether you are literate or not, the Haggadah has the story told for you. But here we see on the left, the Alba Bible. This is not a Jewish text. This is a Catholic illustrated Bible from 1422. So it is 100 years newer than our Golden Haggadah. Looking at both of these images for two communities that ostensibly are following the laws that are contained in Torah, for the Catholics, they would call it Old Testament. For us, simply Hebrew Bible, Tanakh, Torah. What of the second commandment? This is always the question about illustrations and art in Jewish contexts. What about the second commandment? Not making graven images, not creating any, for some, not creating any images of God or of anything that might be worshipped. So the Mishnah was already wrestling with this commandment in a time and a place where illustration and figural art were highly developed and highly valued. In the Roman period in Palestine, in the Sasanian period in Iran, we have emerging visual cultures that are not simply religious, but are showing people how to be good citizens, how to be active members of a society. And so the rabbis are struggling with how to make peace with the images around them without giving up what is an explicit commandment. So the Mishnah, when it discusses images, I'll read you a quote. It says, "All images are forbidden because they are worshipped once a year." So said Rabbi Meir. All right, so that's a blanket ban on images. Back to the Mishnah. But the sages say only images that bear in its hand a staff or a bird or a sphere is forbidden. An image that bears in its hand a staff or a bird or a sphere, those are the icons associated with Roman and Greek gods. So what it's saying is that one rabbi says all images are forbidden, but the vast majority of sages say only those images which are explicitly of gods. False gods are forbidden to us.
It's interesting. I just wanted to mention that I was looking at something this had to do with study on Leviticus, and I saw this painting from Dura Europa.
Mm-hmm.
There's an everyday guy, so to speak, holding a Torah scroll, which is a fascinating image because A, it's an everyday guy and not a priest, and two, it's holding a Torah scroll, which could be seen as certainly, I mean, it is in a sense the reification of God in a way in our world. So it's interesting. That's in what, 250 BCE or something like that? Is that?
CE, it's Common Era. So what we're talking about is a synagogue, an illustrated synagogue, a well with murals around all of the walls with different scenes of Bible and of Jewish life. Dura Europos is in Syria, whatever remains of it now after the rise of ISIL. This is a synagogue that was highly illustrated, a place of study and of worship that contains human images. So yes, an image of an everyday person alongside an image of biblical figures in this space. Yeah.
Just to say that the only reason I raised that is obviously in practice, there was image making.
Yep, there absolutely was. There has been for thousands of years. We go back and forth.
The mosaics. Yeah.
That's why the Mishnah
Okay.
addressed it. Obviously, people did it. And we have synagogues from that time that have astrological imagery and other. Obviously, this has never been a blanket, do not create art.
That's exactly it. And that is the brilliance of Rabbinic Judaism. Rabbinic Judaism is I think of it as the first Reform Judaism, the first reforming Judaism. It is a way of taking traditions and making them live in a modern world that has cultural and political realities different from the time that our traditions first came about. Not to say that Reform Judaism is any better than any other. I am a Reform rabbi.
You can see Rabbi Marder's text. I'm chat.
Just kidding.
Yes, Rabbi Marder's household is a mixed household
Do
as
we
well.
know anything about who painted, who drew it? Was it a Jew or a Gentile who drew the Haggadah?
I'm so glad you asked that question, and that's actually exactly why we have these two images on the screen here. This illustrated Haggadah was probably illustrated by a Christian artist. Not because Jews were forbidden from creating images, but because in the guild system, Jews were largely prevented from becoming masters or even apprentices. They could be supporters. They could do kind of facility cleaning work in a workshop. They could provide the materials to workshops, but Jews were not allowed into guild-based trades. And therefore, it is unlikely that a Jew would be illustrating a manuscript because that is a guild-based trade. However, the text would have been created, would have been scribed by a Jewish artisan who worked outside of the guild. This Christian Bible, the Alba Bible we're looking at to the side, would have also been illustrated by a Christian illustrator. No surprise, it was made for a Catholic, a Christian context. But we know because of the records, the written records of this Bible's creation, we know that the text and the images were overseen by a rabbi. So Jews and Christians were working together in the realm of books, either for Jewish texts that required a Jewish scribe and a Christian illustrator, or even for Christian books that had a Christian scribe, a Christian illustrator, and a Jewish supervisor of the project. It's extraordinary to think about this back and forth between these communities, especially in Spain, especially in just these last few years, last few decades before the Inquisition drives Jews out of the country, or really the two halves of the country. So thank you so much for asking that question. That was exactly what I wanted us to look at here.
May I ask, in what language is the Bible on the left written?
Latin.
The Haggadah, rather.
The Christian.
So the book on the left is a Christian Bible. It is an Old Testament and New Testament, and it's written in Latin. The book on the right is our Golden Haggadah. But both are examples of text and image juxtaposed together or working together in a single volume from
how many of these Golden Haggadah
the northern half of Spain, from the Christian half of Spain. Yeah.
How many Golden Haggadahs were there like at the time, and how many remain today?
There's one Golden Haggadah. This is one book. It's held in the British Library. There are other Haggadot that are preserved from this period. This is really seen as one of the most highly developed Jewish visual cultures in all of our history, because there were so many commissioned artworks that remain extant today. Haggadahs and ketubot, written documents that not so much Bibles, not so much Tanakh or Chumash or Sidur, Sidurim or Machzorim. The space for illustration really exists in Haggadot and in ketubot, and there are so many that remain that were preserved from this period that we have a real sense of how highly developed that visual culture was.
It also says, I would assume, something about the wealth of the community.
Exactly. The wealth of this community or these communities, absolutely. It also speaks to how highly valued these objects were, because as we turn to the century following our Golden Haggadah's creation and the decades following this, the Christian Bible's creation, what we are entering into is the period of Inquisition in Spain. Spain in the 1480s and into the 1490s is a place where Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand come together in marriage, an alliance between two Catholic monarchies in northern Spain. And these two strong monarchies in their alliance become strong enough to conquer the last Muslim stronghold of southern Spain and unite the Spanish peninsula through war, through conquering, and through marriage. When we talk about the Kingdom of Portugal, they're able to bring the entire Iberian Peninsula under the banner of the Catholic Church. They have Catholicized all of Spain, which means that Muslims must convert, must leave, or must die, and Jews must convert or must leave. It's only after 1492 when the Inquisition and the Catholic Church realized that Jews who want to stay in their homes and remain Jewish are doing so secretly. They convert publicly, but continue to practice Judaism in their homes. And that to the church is seen as, well, that's beyond the pale. It's unacceptable because secret Jews may convince real Catholics to also become secret Jews, that this is a threat to the church and to the supremacy of their Lord Jesus Christ. So Jews then either must leave, must truly convert, or must die. The Jews who died in the Spanish Inquisition were not Jews who were practicing their faith publicly. They were the secret Jews, the crypto Jews, the conversos, or in some contemporary language, the Marranos. Those were the Jews who were killed in the Inquisition. But this Haggadah, the Golden Haggadah, and the Ketubot and the other beautifully illustrated Haggadot of 13th, 14th, and 15th century Spain, they exist today because the families who owned those Haggadot took them with them when they were expelled from the country. Spain, like Germany in the 20th century, allowed Jews to take very little if they were lucky enough to leave the country. They could take certain limited possessions, clothing, food, family possessions. Most ritual items had to stay behind because they were made of precious metals or gems, included gems. But books and documents were more likely to be able to slip through the exit tax reviews because they were not understood to be as valuable as materials that could be reused or remelted. This is how books like the Golden Haggadah end up in other countries. The Jews of Spain flee. So many of them flee in 1492, in the fall of 1492. Late summer, early fall of 1492. They go to Turkey, which is the only country where the ruler says, Jews who are being expelled, please come here. We want you to come here. Jews flee from Spain to Portugal, which only lasts as a safe haven for a few years until Ferdinand and Isabella's daughter marries the son of the Portuguese king, which brings the Inquisition to Portugal as well. They have to flee from there. And many of the Spanish Portuguese Jews go north into the Netherlands, where the Protestant Revolution has really pulled Catholicism and the Catholic Church out of those countries, which makes it a safe haven for Jews as well. Some Jews go to Palestine, go to back to the Promised Land, but a large contingent go to Italy, and in particular to the trade cities of Italy, including Venice in the north, Rome, Florence, which is about to have its, or is in the middle of its flowering. The Golden Haggadah, the family that owned it, we know went to Italy. We don't know if it was their first stop, but we know that eventually this Haggadah made it to Italy because the cover of the Golden Haggadah is Italian tooled leather. This cover tells us the movement of this book. We know that the Golden Haggadah was made in around 1320 because of the style of the painting and the materials used. We know that it went to Italy because it was rebound there with this new leather cover. The Jews had to flee from this Spain that was no longer theirs, a Spain that had, hundreds of years before been the home of a golden age of convivencia, of living together. Following the Inquisition of Isabella Católica and Fernando, of Isabel and Ferdinand, the Jews of Sepharad, the Jews of Spain, scatter through the world, including to Italy. All right, here's another moment that would have relied on some animation to see things not all at once. But here we go. Manuscript illumination, which is part of the artistry of this Haggadah when it was created in 14th century Spain. This practice of illumination follows Jews, and rather Jews go to places where this is again an artistic tradition that is being practiced when Jews move to Italy, when Jews move to Portugal, when Jews move to the northern countries, the Low Countries, the Netherlands. Manuscript illumination is one of the widest spread artistic practices of this time period across Europe. It involves 3 separate skills. And we've already talked about this a little bit. It involves calligraphy, involves illustration, and as we see here in a section heading from the Golden Haggadah on the right, and from a 12th century Spanish manuscript on the left, the third piece is illuminating letters, of bringing painting into letters themselves. So this Pauline epistle, the letters of St. Paul from 12th century Spain on the left, it takes a letter P and draws a little scene inside of it. In the Golden Haggadah, it's a little bit less, let's see. Nope. Oh, wow. That is not what I intended to do. My apologies. Let me go back to my Golden Haggadah. I do not know what happened here. No.
I can share my screen if you'd like.
There we go. Nope, I got it.
Okay, good.
All right. I'm going to share my screen again. My apologies. All right. So we have the figural illumination of a letter from a Christian manuscript, but we have also the illumination of letters in our Golden Haggadah. This section heading that draws almost a cartouche or an architectural lintel above the new section and places the words into that illumination. Letter illumination is a highly developed skill, especially in monasteries where monks are bringing as much visual interest to the written word as possible. In monasteries, monks are practicing chidur mitzvah. They are practicing the beautification of the word. This is one of the areas or one of the values that the Christian and the Jewish communities held in common that allowed us to work together on Christian Bibles and on Jewish illuminated manuscripts as well. This desire to make the word as beautiful as possible because that brings even more meaning to the words themselves. It's also showing us that it's the same people who are working on both kinds of manuscripts. The same, not just the same skills are being developed in two communities. These two communities are working together to create these beautiful, beautiful books. I know we're running low on time, so I'm going to skip a deeper conversation about additional collaborations between Jewish and Christian artisans. But I do want to mention that this beautiful Northern Italian 15th century manuscript on the left, it is a Mishnah Torah. It is the illustration of a Jewish legal text and going beyond the illumination of a Haggadah or of a Ketubah. This is Maimonides' Mishnah Torah. This specific book is one of the greatest objects in Jewish material culture and Jewish history, a collaboration between Jewish and Christian artisans as well. This object, which is co-owned by the Israel Museum in Jerusalem and the Metropolitan Museum in New York City, is going on view this year in 2023 at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And if you have any interest in these collaborations and these moments of coincidence and cooperation between Jewish and Christian communities, even in the shadow of a moment like the Inquisition, this object is well worth seeing in person when you can.
So does that mean that some Jewish religious texts were illustrated by monks?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
I know it's for
whether those Jewish religious texts were then used by Jewish communities or were simply used by the monks in their study, that I don't know. But yes, there were Jewish texts being created in Christian contexts as well. Yeah. There was another question.
It's for, I was going to ask, it's for another lecture. I look forward to hearing from you, but I know there was a flowering period, the Iberian Peninsula of Jewish and Moorish collaboration. I mean, that I'm just curious to know how you attribute the cooperation and the integration of skills in these rather conflicting communities in the centuries that followed. I mean, they didn't write their name. Fra so-and-so illustrated this, right?
That's
so,
rare.
Like I said, I know it's for a longer discussion. It's a wonderful,
and it's such an important question that how do we go from convivencia, from that living together, not always comfortably, but almost always peacefully, between Muslims and Jews in southern Spain, and flip to that sense of Christian superiority that leads to the Inquisition and the expulsion of Jews and forced conversions of Jews and of Muslims. How do we go from one to the other? There are volumes and volumes and volumes written on this. So to answer it al regel achat, to answer it in a very brief way, the Muslim dynasties in southern Spain, with one exception, were really focused on a diverse community and a diverse society because non-Muslims paid more in taxes and were able to support the Muslim governments. It's easier to live in peace and to tax your neighbors than to force them to leave and lose the creativity and the revenue and the interface between you. That is a short version. The church didn't need to tax non-Christians. The church needed everybody to be Christian. It's the difference between a dynasty that is, or dynasties that are political but have a religious identity, and dynasties that are religious with a political arm, if that makes sense. So that is an oversimplification, but I think the best I can do in
Thank you.
one moment. But what we're seeing here among Christians, among Jews, and even earlier in southern Spain among Muslims as well, art shows us what the world of the creators looked like. Not the world that they are illustrating, but the world that they are seeing. So we have, let's see if I can go backwards. When we see an image like this page from the Golden Haggadah, people are dressed, as we said, somebody already said that at the very beginning, these are medieval knights who are riding horses. What they are wearing, how they are riding, how they are formed has nothing to do with ancient Egypt and everything to do with 14th century Spain. The clothing of the women and men who are leaving, streaming out of Egypt, those who are in their bedrooms, we see what they wear, we see what their personal spaces looked like. These are illustrations of 14th century Barcelona, not of, Egypt in 1500 BCE. Oh, hey, Hilly and O's. Hi, friends.
Hey, Rabbi Berman.
Hi, Rabbi Haber. Hello, O's. Hi, buddy.
Don't go on the Zoom.
Aw. So here, before we finish our time together, we can take a look on the left side at the Golden Haggadah again. The clothing, the tile walls, the even what would show up on a table in the Sarajevo Haggadah on the right side, which is another 14th century Barcelona Haggadah. We see what people look like, we see where they are living, we see how they are gathering, we see who is in relationship to whom. So for example, in a society where women are completely separated from men, you will not see women and men in a single scene together. Here, we have women and men together. So it's telling us something about 14th century Barcelona and the world that the creators and the commissioners and the users of these Haggadahs, what they were experiencing. But before we finish, let's turn our attention just for a moment to the Haggadah to the right. This is the Sarajevo Haggadah, a Haggadah that went from Barcelona to its expulsion from Spain and eventually ended up in Sarajevo in the 19th and 20th centuries, which is why it bears that name. Here we see a family with dressed in orange and green and orange again, female members of the family, a figure to the right with an orange headdress and white garments that may be a male member of the family. And on the near side of the table, a figure in yellow with a differently colored face. We are seeing a household of people.
Can I just make a comment about the Sarajevo Haggadah?
Well, before you make the comment, let me finish what I'm saying,
Okay.
and then I'm very happy for you to speak. In this Haggadah, we see a household. In this illustration, we see a household that may not look like what we expect a household to look like. Seated around a Seder table, this family, this household, includes people with different colored skin. All right. What was it that you were anxious to say about the Sarajevo Haggadah?
We've seen the Sarajevo Haggadah. It's in a very secret room in the main museum of Bosnia-Herzegovina, and they consider it their most sacred text.
It's an incredible journey. It's an
incredible
journey that this object can be seen and valued in that way in the place where it ended up. Jewish history, Jewish stories don't stay put. We as a people don't stay put. And we as a people have never been just one thing. Looking at this image here, and this I think is where we're going to finish today. Looking at this image, it reflects the experience of the family that commissioned this Haggadah, just as the Golden Haggadah reflected the experience of the family that commissioned it. It reflected the time and the place where it was made and the family that commissioned it. And in this world, in this Jewish household, we see Jews of every color. The woman closest to us in the saffron robe with the dark skin is holding up the matzah, while the man across the table from her is holding up, and the girl across the table from her are holding up wine glasses. They're all participating in the ritual of the Seder. They are all gathered together. They are all celebrating. They are all marking this moment. Now, I'm going to stop my screen share now, because the most important element of this whole conversation is how these haggadot of the 14th century of Spain, of a people who were right on the verge of the end of a golden age, their haggadot told their stories. And as the Sarajevo Haggadah and the Golden Haggadah tell us, they tell the stories of people who were dispersed, who went elsewhere, but who maintained their traditions and held on to the value of these objects. How are our haggadot doing the same for us? How do our haggadot tell our story today? How do they reflect our families and our experiences and our time and our place? And are our haggadot things that we are going to want to pass down? Or do we have haggadot that were passed down to us because they connect us to the generations that came before and the generations that are still to come? You know, because it is 11:17, we've gone a little bit long. I can let that be a rhetorical question, the first rhetorical question of the day, but as something that we think about as we leave and enter into our season of freedom. How do our haggadot, how do our Seder plates, how do our recipes tell our story of who and where we are now and who and where we may be in the future as we pass these down? So the Golden Haggadah tells its story and our Haggadahs tell our stories. Thank you so much for your patience with my technical difficulties and with our going a little bit long. I've loved hearing from you and learning from you as well. Thank you so much, Rabbi Martyr, for inviting me, and thank you all for having me.
Eshka.
Yasher koach.
Thank you.
And
Thank you
Chag
so
Thank you
much.
very much.
Sameach.
It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Chag Sameach. Thank you so much.
A lot of food for thought. Thank you. Chag sameach, everyone.
Bye-bye.